Hey, I'm Matt Geiger. My goal is to tell the full story, not the liberal story or the conservative story. That's why I'm giving a moderate's take on the issues. The first point you hear from Republicans is that immigrants use benefits that are intended for U.S. citizens. And on the other side, Democrats say immigrants actually use less benefits than citizens. So as far as benefits for undocumented immigrants go, they can get emergency Medicaid. Like if they were to show up at a hospital, they'll get treated, but they can't have full Medicaid. They're also eligible for WIC, Women, Infant, Children Assistance. That's sort of like food stamps, but for pregnant women, new mothers, and young children. But it's a lot more limited than food stamps. And then the children of undocumented immigrants can go to K through 12 public schools. Illegal immigrants aren't eligible for any other federal programs, though, other than those. If states do go beyond that, they're spending their own money, not federal dollars. So if you have a green card, you're called a permanent resident. And that's basically the step before citizenship. You're in the country legally. Permanent residents have practically all the same benefits U.S. citizens have, except you need to meet some criteria. You either need to have had a green card for 5 years or you need to have worked for 10 years on most of them. And that's obviously on top of the program criteria. These are all going to vary a bit by state, so I'm just going to talk in general situations. A green card holder can get supplemental security income if they've worked 10 years and held their green card 5 years, so both of the criteria. They're eligible for Social Security and SNAP, that's food stamps, if they've worked 10 years in the U.S. A permanent resident's eligible for Medicare, full Medicaid, and then TANF and SCHIP, State Children's Health Insurance Program, if they've held their green card for 5 years. Section 8 housing vouchers and affordable care act exchanges and subsidies are both open to all green card holders. There are tons of studies on both sides showing that immigrants either use more or less benefits than citizens. At the end of the day, it all just depends on which programs are being included and whether you are measuring a person individually or by household. By person shows that they use less, by household shows they use more. And I tend to think that this gets tossed out there a lot to back up both sides, but it kind of misses the point that Republicans are concerned about, that immigrants are a drain to the system even though they're not U.S. citizens. And the most comprehensive, fair studies that I found seem to indicate that when you consider benefit use and taxes paid in, first-generation immigrants are a net cost of about $1,600 per year. But then second-generation immigrants contribute a net $1,700 per year, which is more than the average U.S. citizen even contributes. And then third generation contributes the same as any other U.S. citizen, $1,300 per year. The cost is very concentrated on state and local government, though, specifically school or any other programs that a state decides on its own that it's going to fund. State and local government gets sales, income, and property taxes from immigrants to partially offset the services they're giving, but it's really the federal government that's coming out on top here. So the federal government is collecting Social Security and Medicare taxes on wages for people that are likely to never be eligible for those programs, so they're paying in but not getting out. Republicans claim that our asylum policies are too easily taken advantage of by illegal immigrants. And what they're talking about here is when an immigrant shows up at the border, they can claim asylum, and then they interview with a USCIS asylum officer. The vast majority of immigrants make it past this stage and they're granted a trial in front of an immigration judge, but there's such a backlog in that system that it can take a year or two before they even get a trial date. In the meantime, the immigrant is allowed to enter the U.S., and if the trial is more than a year away, they can even get a work visa. Only 13% of claims are ultimately granted asylum, and those are really heavily slanted to people who have an attorney. So for these reasons, almost half of all immigrants, 44%, just don't even bother show up to their trial, and they decide to stay in the U.S. illegally. So I would call this a legitimate concern that Republicans have here. The next set of talking points is around immigrant criminals. Republicans claim that a lot of the time, immigrants that we're letting in are violent criminals. And the research on this is pretty much near unanimous. In the U.S., legal immigrants are usually found to be equally likely or slightly less likely to commit crimes. There's less research on illegal immigrants just by virtue of how tough it is to get numbers on them, but the picture on the studies that are out there looks similar for illegal immigrants too. And the logic behind that seems to make sense. It's just that the stakes are so high. If you commit a crime, you're going to get deported. Taking criminality to another level, then, Republicans are also worried about terrorists slipping through our immigration system. Democrats claim that we already have a really strong vetting process. So prior to 9/11, it was 100% true that our immigration process was just not good enough. It actually wasn't even meant to stop terrorists. It was just geared towards people who were sneaking in to start a life in the U.S. So, for example, example, the Saudi 9/11 hijackers weren't even interviewed to get visas because Saudis were seen as being low risk for overstaying their visas. But after 9/11, obviously that all changed. A study counted people who had terrorist sympathies or associations prior to coming to the US, and then they later went on to commit any terrorist crime within 10 years. And in the 15 years before 9/11, there were 52 of those visa vetting failures. And then in the 15 years after 9/11, there were 13 vetting failures. So that's 2.5% of all terrorism offenders convicted or killed after 9/11. On top of that, only 0.4%, or just 2 people, just straight up entered the country illegally over the border, which I think is the main concern of Republicans. Some Democrats say that U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, that's ICE, should be just eliminated. A big part of this grew out of the policy of family separation at the border. This is a little bit ironic because ICE wasn't even responsible for that policy. That's CBP, Custom and Border Protection. ICE is an agency within the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, and it's tasked with protecting the U.S. from cross-border crime and illegal immigration that threatens national security and public safety. So as part of that, they are responsible for finding people who are in the country illegally and getting them deported. So Democrats haven't proposed housing these responsibilities anywhere else if ICE were to be eliminated. Essentially, they just want to eliminate deporting people from the country, and that's their main goal. Some politicians have said that they'd figure out the next step once they got that far. But I think it's pretty clear that this hasn't been well thought through, and it would lead to all sorts of bad incentives to encourage people to enter the country illegally. I think this is more of an emotional and a political reaction than anything else. To keep out illegal immigrants, a good chunk of Republicans want to build a border wall. Democrats say that a border wall would be prohibitively expensive, and immigrants would continue to find ways into the country anyways. Studies on this do see a localized huge reduction in crossings when walls go up, but more expansive studies have found that crossings tend to go up in other places. So some studies estimate the cost of building a wall to be about the same as the cost to hire more border patrol agents to prevent the same number of people crossing the border. This also ignores that nearly 2/3 of illegal immigrants enter the country legally, initially with a visa, and then they overstay their non-immigrant visas. So there is a place for border walls as a deterrence to illegal immigration on a localized basis, clearly, but likely there are other more cost-effective solutions to the overall border problem. The next disagreement is on the economy. People who want to let in more immigrants say that immigrants are good for the economy, and people who oppose more immigration, and you find both Democrats and Republicans say this, they say that immigrants take American jobs and they drive down wages. And economists are pretty much unanimous that immigrants are a net positive for the U.S. economy overall in a bunch of different ways. Immigrants with more skills and education are a huge boost to the economy. They are productive for the economy, they file patents at a higher rate, and they start businesses at a higher rate. But even low-skill, uneducated immigrants are a net benefit for the economy. The one really big caveat, though, is that these low-skill immigrants do drive down low-skill wages. While they are impacting some U.S. jobs, they're mainly driving down the wages of other immigrants who are already in the U.S., though. In terms of taking U.S. jobs, in general, low-skill immigrants are taking jobs that citizens don't want, while all the immigrants drive more jobs in other areas of the economy to compensate. So on this one, immigrants are a net benefit, but the downside is very concentrated on the low-skill workers, especially existing immigrants that are in the country. What I've seen from both sides is a focus on oversimplified solutions. Border walls, eliminating ICE, false generalizations of immigrant criminality. These all make for really easily understood policies that pack lots of emotion, but they avoid the nuanced, real discussion. Our politicians and their policy laziness, I think, is largely to blame for a system today that doesn't work for either the citizens of the US or the immigrants. Thanks for watching. Hey, if you found this video interesting or useful, please give it a thumbs up, put a comment below, and subscribe to my channel to get any updates on new videos. If you didn't like it, you should probably go ahead and put a comment below too to let everybody know. Either way, thanks for watching.